Maybe you've been in a church at some point and during the morning, somebody with a microphone comes up and they say something like, just leave behind those things that are troubling you. Just leave it at the door and come into the presence of Jesus. There's been some sort of an invitation to leave behind something that was troublesome or worrisome or that was broken and come into the presence of what is holy and experience something different. Maybe you've had that experience. I don't know that that's actually a Christian thing to do, especially not on Easter. So here's my invitation to you this morning. This morning, haul all of that trash in with you. If you need to go back and get something out of the car, we can wait. Bring it in, place it front and center, put it on your mind, put it on Jesus' mind, and then watch Him destroy it. Because it's Easter, and on Easter we celebrate that Jesus destroyed death, so that means we could think for 1,000 years and not ever come up with something that He can't destroy. I bought a chainsaw this week. A used chainsaw. $120 on Kijiji. I read extensively about this chainsaw. It's a 20-year-old John Deere. It was made by Echo. It was made in Japan. It's just like the new one I want to get for $750, but it's $120. But I have some misgivings about buying a chainsaw because before I had a chainsaw, and I currently I had a little one, a little 33cc Poulin, and now this John Deere is like a 70cc beast. Now, before I had any chainsaw, I wanted to borrow a chainsaw from somebody. And I asked this person, who shall remain nameless, can I borrow your chainsaw? And this person is not really one for yes or no answers. You usually get a story, or a parable, or some kind of weird aphorism, and you're not quite sure what they really meant. So I asked for permission to borrow the chainsaw, and this person whose chainsaw I wished to borrow went, well now son, that's like borrowing another man's wife. I was like, I don't know chainsaws, really, like I'm just getting into this, but I don't get the comparison, and I still don't. But it was enough to make me feeling a little bit immoral when I bought one on Kijiji, and this Hutterite guy shows up with his chainsaw and walks me through it, and it's all good. The thing works great. I had it up at the cabin over the weekend, and I was just going through these big oak logs like butter. It was fantastic. My son has new respect for me as I deftly handle this monster, because my old one at 33 cubic centimeters, I basically feel like now I could take two of them and juggle them. They're just like baby saws. Now that I have authority and dominion over this big beast, everything that's smaller than that is easy. You should see me with a steak knife. Last night, it was just all over the place. Now, on Easter, we celebrate Jesus' victory and dominion over death. And we cheer and we love it, and it draws us to church. Some of us, maybe it's like the 3 or 4 times you're in church, you make sure one of them a year is Easter, because there is this hope that we need to have about when we die, and it's good to fuel that. But what you need to understand is that because Jesus has dominion over death, everything smaller than that He can have victory over. And His intention is not just to kind of come through for you when you die, but to come through for you and with you in every moment of your life leading up to that. In this passage that we're looking at, it's not a classic Easter passage. We're working our way through the book of Mark, and what's nice about this is if you're visiting at Easter, you can see what happens next week and the next week, because we're working our way through this book of the Bible, and if this is engaging to you, you can come back and keep following the story. So it's not a one-off kind of Easter sermon, but it does have Easter elements in it, and we'll get to them as we go. We'll pick it up in Mark 2. Those of you who haven't been tracking with the story, last week we saw Jesus heal somebody who's lowered through the roof, placed in front of him. He makes the man walk, He heals him, and then He forgives his sins, and there's the start of this confrontation with religious authorities that's going to come up here. Our story continues, and Jesus is walking out alongside the lake. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. If you were to pull out a map, you'd see the Sea of Galilee, and from this time you would see that there's one color of land here, one color of land here, and another color of land here. It all used to belong to let's call him the original King Herod, or the really bad King Herod, the one that wanted to kill all the babies when Jesus was born. He's since passed away, and he couldn't get the system going where there's just one king because he has 3 sons, right? So there's some family fighting. You got to divide the farm amongst 3 kids, right? Or pay out one, that kind of thing. That's not a new problem. King Herod has got this issue with his boys, so what he does is he divides the kingdom into 3 parts. This color, this color, this color, all around the Sea of Galilee. This really stinks if you're a peasant who's trying to eke out an existence, because now you've got 3 people trying to tax you. 3 sets of infrastructure, so to speak. You've got 3 palaces, 3 armies, three of everything, and the same amount of people to pay for it as they move back and forth through the countryside. At the border between 2 of these territories is where Levi is sitting, right at the top of the lake. Levi is nobody's favorite person. But he's like the poor person that you kind of feel sorry for when you think about it, because they take all the grief, but they're not getting rich off the thing. So somewhere in the background, there's somebody who has bid on the contract to collect the taxes in the area. That's more like a Zacchaeus person, if you're familiar with the Bible. Somebody who's getting very wealthy, isn't really doing much, he just has the money to buy the contract, and then he hires the people to collect the taxes. Levi is more of a frontline worker, right? He doesn't have the contract, he's like the drywaller, right? He's the person right there. But he gets all the grief, I would think. His boss is isolated somewhere, Levi is sitting there, and to make matters worse, his name is Levi. Levi is from the Levites, which were the priests of Israel. So you have somebody who has somewhere in his background this strong connection with the Jewish faith that's been suppressed by Romans, and now he is collecting taxes on behalf of a bunch of idolatrous. It means they're worshiping a different god, which is a huge deal for Jews. And he's taking money out of the good and holy people to support the bad ones. You bet he hears it every day from everybody. And so when Jesus comes, you can imagine what's going through his mind. He's clearly heard of Jesus. We'll see that in a second. As he walked along, Jesus, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. This is not just a cold call. Levi knows who Jesus is. The disciples, before they decided to follow, had heard of Jesus. At this point, there's only 4 disciples. Levi here is the 5th. There's 4 fishermen who probably just went, "Oh, shoot. Why are we bringing him? Like, this was kind of our thing, Jesus. It was us 4. You were teaching us. We were getting it all, and now you're bringing him?" We don't know that, but it's not that much of a stretch. And then they all go over to Levi's house. Well, Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house. So it's like, "Follow me." And Levi's like, "Where are we going?" And Jesus says, "To your house." So off they go to Levi's house. Some scholars think it might be Jesus' house. Either way, it's pretty awesome if you're Levi. I got to go to Jesus' house, or Jesus came to my house. Either way, it's pretty good. And they're sitting there, Levi and his buddies. Many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Easy for us to pick on the Pharisees and the teachers of the law for not getting it. But you wouldn't have to think for very long, and this is the point of the text, for you to find somebody who you think Jesus has no business enjoying their company. You really wouldn't have to think that long. Here's some examples. Jesus is sitting with a bunch of anti-gay fascists having a meal. Some of us would be like, "Jesus, what are you doing there?" Some of us, Jesus is marching in the gay pride parade. "Jesus, what are you doing there?" Some of us, Jesus is having lunch, he's having a potluck with the pro-choice folks. Others, he's having lunch with the pro-life people. Jesus, what are you doing at the powwow? You shouldn't be dancing. You need to have like a booth where you hand out pamphlets. Maybe you can go then, but don't be doing that. Don't enjoy yourself. Some of us would be really upset if Jesus was having breakfast with the old retired dudes at McDonald's every weekday morning who go like this in the direction of Long Plain and Dakota Plains and say, those people. So we could just keep going, right? Because everybody in this room would have a group like that. What are you doing, Jesus? You shouldn't be with those racist, liberal, whatever category isn't you. But if we did that long enough, we'd realize that we've sort of eliminated the entire human race, right? Because the opposite of us is eventually going to be everybody if enough of us are involved in playing that game. But Jesus came for everybody. So the point here is not to be high and mighty and go, oh, those Pharisees, they just didn't get it. Jesus didn't come for those. No, it's to help us see that we're not getting it. Now, there's maybe some of us that are like, yes, right, Jesus affirms. He just affirms. And he does. He affirms worth everywhere he goes without any hesitation and without any disclaimer. He affirms human worth and value. And he does it by putting himself at risk in the company of people where he could be tremendously misunderstood, where they actually might feel better about themselves. He affirms their worth. You affirm somebody's worth, know how? By making them feel worth something. And that's what Jesus does. But he does not affirm their condition. So before we get super excited, some of us, about Jesus' main message, and the main message of Easter being everyone is okay the way they are, that's not what Jesus does. That's an affirmation of condition. Everyone is valuable as they are. That's an affirmation of worth, absolutely. But this next line leaves no doubt that Jesus is not about affirming everyone's condition, ours or the people opposite of us. So the scribes and the Pharisees have just said, what is he doing? Eating with such scum. And then Jesus says, on hearing this, Jesus said to them, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've come not to call the righteous, but sinners. It's kind of funny that, Levi's probably sitting right there. And Jesus goes, no, he's sick as a dog. I mean, look at the guy. He clearly needs my help. He's working for a corrupt government. Who knows? Did you see what's in his liquor cabinet? I mean, it's just a mess. And Levi's just sort of happy Jesus is in his house, right? There's no pushback to him being told he's sick. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. There's a nickname that developed really early for Jesus among Christians. They started calling him the great physician. It's actually not in the Bible anywhere that he's used by that term, but people who experienced him began to understand him as a fantastic doctor. And if you think for a while about what a doctor does and see what Jesus does, you can see why people started to think that way. But first think about what you do not want a doctor to do. You walk into their office, you're carrying 50 extra pounds, your eyes twitching, right? Your right glute is clenching. It's a real thing, I know some of you have that. It's a weird example, sorry. You go in and clearly something's wrong. And if the doctor says, it's all good, I affirm you, carry on. You find yourself a new doctor. One who helps you when you know something's wrong. We don't want a doctor who affirms our dysfunction and our lack of health. We want a doctor who can help us live better. We want a doctor who can diagnose the problem and prescribe a solution. That's what we want. So let's go back then to the concept at the very beginning of me chatting with you, that the greater the thing you have authority over, the more you can speak into the lesser things. So Jesus' nickname is not the great funeral director, that he helps us pass into some unknown condition. Part of what makes him the great physician is he's the only one who's actually figured out how to cure death. And his invitation to Levi to follow him actually ends up going right through the grave to the other side, as does his invitation to you to follow him. But it doesn't start there. The great physician, yeah, he can tackle these amazing, terribly difficult things like death. And because he can do that, your best move is to trust him with the headaches of your day-to-day life. He can take care of the big stuff. He can probably take care of your boo-boos. But there's a disconnect there for some of us. And maybe it's because our death is far away, and we might not actually know how much we trust Jesus with it until we get a little bit closer. But you have a pretty good indication of how much you'll trust him with it when you get closer, when you think about how much you actually trust him with your boo-boos, with your headaches of today. And it would be really illogical to trust Jesus with your death, which is such a huge problem, and not trust him with your life. Like the one who conquered death and came out the other side and invites you to it might not know how to budget well. Might not know what financial priorities, might not know what he's talking about when he tells you to forgive or to show mercy or to serve or to love or to pour yourself out for people. Or to imagine that the one who defeated death actually can't speak to you. That would make no sense. Like, not a bit. So there should be a tension inside of some of us when we come and we celebrate this deliverance from death, but we're like, but he hasn't yet delivered me from life. So I have this hope for later, a hope about me dying and it being different and good and getting through it, but I don't have a hope that's alive, a living hope. But when there's that illogical disconnect from your death and your life, you're missing out on what the Bible says hope actually is. The Bible never talks about Jesus as being a hope only from when you die, as a dying hope, let's say. It very specifically, in the Scriptures, uses the term living hope. And what that doesn't just mean, although thank God it means this, is that Jesus is alive. So our hope is in Jesus and he's alive. So he's a living hope. And that means that when you ask him questions, he can talk to you. When you need to be comforted, he can comfort you. He is alive, and it also means that he conquered death. But that living hope also means that this afternoon, when I face temptation, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead is in me as a Christian to help me fight that temptation. I've got a hope for today because of Easter. Because he conquered death, he can tame my tongue. Because he conquered death, he can help my marriage. Because he conquered death, he can help me endure a tough workplace situation. Because he conquered death, he can heal me physically. Because he conquered death, he can get rid of the terrible spiritual forces that try to impact me and harass me. Because he conquered death, he can help me with my addiction. Because he conquered death, he can give me courage to make the decisions that I need to make. Because he conquered death, he can give me the power to ask somebody to forgive me and mean it. Because he conquered death, he can help me to love people I find unlovable. He's your living hope. Don't defer your hope until you die. If you do that, it's not going to mean much for you when you're lying there and your pulse is getting slower and slower. You're probably going to be pretty panicky. You can't conjure up hope when you die that you don't have when you're living. But a magnificent, beautiful death starts with a day-by-day reliance on a living hope, a contagious living hope. The message of Easter, friends, is not someday it's all going to be fine. Although, praise God, someday it's all going to be fine. The message of Easter is that it bleeds into your life this afternoon, living hope for right now, living hope for tomorrow, and living hope forever. I'm going to invite the band out, and let's sing.